eggs in the back.
If you want to take a seat, you have water, lemonade. coffee.
Maybe I'll be the last one to get a.
Make yourself comfortable. We intentionally set the room with fewer chairs so you don't can sit up close.
I left the chicken on the smoker and I'm just hoping that Ryan, like, I texted the whole family. I was like, somebody needs to take the chicken off the smoker.
We do have a couple seats over by Callie, raise your hand, Carol Collins, raise your hand, there's the chairs. We can get more, should we do it?
No. There's some chairs up here.
Sit in the front. Okay. I think we can get this thing kicked off. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. It is such a pleasure to have you here. And this is our fourth public meeting, the fourth time we've been in front of you, and the final time. So we're hoping to make this really, really rich. And it's really great to have the attendance. Some of you haven't been here before at all, and some of you have not missed one. So there's gratitude for each and every one of you that have made it, whether once or whether 17 times, because we've been here a lot. My name is Meg O'Leary, and I am the Community Engagement and Stakeholder Outreach Person for the Big Sky Governance Project. This is Dylan Pipinich. He is with WGM Group. WGM Group is the lead consultant on this project, and he is the consultant leader, the team leader for this. You've been seeing him since we came in July or in September of 2024. Many of you have got to know him personally too, so that's pretty cool. Also from WGM Group on the phone or streaming in is Caitlin Frisbee. She's been extremely important to keeping us in line, keeping us on task. So thank you to Caitlin. We also have Leanne Ryan and Sarah Emmons from the Echo Northwest group. You've seen these ladies. They're here to give you all the fiscal analysis in the detail. Tonight's, the purpose for tonight's meeting, we do have some more chairs. Welcome, come on in. There's one here. There's one here. We're making this intentionally cozy, but we will, yes, we do have more chairs coming.
Right up front.
Yeah, 2 chairs up front. Come on up here, guys, because you will get the, All right. All right. The purpose for tonight's meeting is to present the final report to the community, to the public. You're going to get a deeper dive into the 3 scenarios that were presented at the July 22nd meeting. That was our 3rd public meeting right here. You're also going to hear from the fiscal team about each and every one of those scenarios. The agenda is this team will present a very detailed PowerPoint presentation. It will take about 30 minutes. After Dylan's done with his part, we'll open it up to Q&A, and then we'll roll into the financial part. And after that, we'll open it up again to Q&A. This is designed to be a community conversation. We expect there to be a lot of questions about money, about fiscal stuff. We'll get to them, but let's let each piece get through their slides before we do the questions. Before we do the formal presentation, I have the pleasure of introducing the subcommittee. These are the leaders in the community that have been guiding us, advising us, and really giving us a lot of vision on how to go about the study. Sarah Blechta is the chair of the committee. I'm going to hand the microphone to Sarah. She's going to, if any of you need her to be introduced, she's going to introduce herself. She's going to give a little background on the subcommittee, what has been and how the subcommittee has been involved and with study particularly, and a little bit about why. And maybe if she learned anything new. And then, sorry.
Came up. I was curious at the time as the chair about how that would impact or how it could impact resort tax. What did that mean for our community? what does that mean for the investments that resort tax puts into the community if all of a sudden there was an incorporation and there were different tax dollars and there was some discussion and some questions about how resort tax could or would or should fund this type of endeavor. So I was really interested in it. I spent a lot of time reading Kate's binder and then talking to people and found out that prior to the 2008 discussion, it had been brought up prior. The chamber had been involved a number of times. And so really just wanted to understand from the resort tax lens what that meant. Like, what else am I supposed to?
Did you learn anything?
Oh, I did learn some things, but I want Dylan to kind of talk about his part and the ladies to talk about their part, because I really think that we're all gonna learn a lot, right? One of the problems that I saw this subcommittee actually had met prior, and we did some facilitated meetings where we spent a lot of time together and worked on kind of like what's happening? What is this? What should we be asking? How can we do it in a way that works for the community and doesn't say, this is what we should do and tell everybody what to do? I was very, very, I think maybe to a fault. This is not meant to be any type of political agenda. This is simply a fact-finding mission because unfortunately, there have been a lot of rumors. There's a lot of misunderstanding, mistruths, and I don't think they're intentional. I think they were just a lot of different people's opinions and facts got mixed around. And so really finding a way to have very clear facts was another reason that resort tax was involved. We were able to kind of be an intermediary and say, these are just facts. And then you get to decide what you do with the facts. This is not a pamphlet to say, you should incorporate, you should create a county, you should do nothing. Like, this is literally just meant to be facts for our community to make decisions that work for them and is best for each individual, because it will probably be different based on where your home is located, based on what you believe to be true and what things are that are important to you. They're going to talk a lot tonight about different options and what these things mean. Those of you that have been in a lot of these rooms for a lot of this last, 12 plus months, none of these things are going to be new. You're going to hear about services and services you could get, services you can't get, square miles and how many square miles you need and things like that. And so I think we're all going to learn a lot, but I think it is also a lot of the same information, just presented differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And the subcommittee, I am going to give you a minute each and you can go ahead and take it away.
You go first.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Give me the 10-second warning. Okay, I wasn't planning on going first. I was gonna say-
All right, here, give me this.
No, no.
I like that.
It's been a real honor to be a part of this. It's been a few years. My name is Matt Kidd and I'm the president of Lone Mountain Land Company. Sorry. I have a lot of responsibility for a lot of things here. A lot of responsibility for a lot of things in Big Sky. I accept that. I accept a lot of responsibility. I have tried to give a lot to this community. And I will continue to try to give a lot to this community. If I thought that I want to, it's been great to be a part of this. You guys have done amazing work. I also want to apologize in advance. I can't stay the whole time today. But if I thought any of these scenarios would easily make a better Big Sky, make our future better, I would be all about it. I'm all for the best possible future of Big Sky. But they don't. Like, there's no easy button for the problems that we have. We need to figure out a better model of the state of Montana for school funding. We need to do that. It's very important. It's a very important issue for our community. Nothing about these scenarios changes how schools get funded. We need to make sure we're attracting leaders to this community, and the next Danny Birchwells and Jackie Haynes doesn't guarantee any of that. Like, there's many challenges, and we will continue to do what we can to address the challenges of this community. And I'm all for anything that improves the life of the future of Big Sky. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Brad Navin. I'm the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and Visit Big Sky. I think a couple takeaways for me is this is so complicated. And if anybody thinks that we can solve this in a week or 2 weeks or 2 years, it's an ongoing battle. So very complicated project, and we've been working on that. At the same time, though, I think what I really learned in this process, though, is also celebrating our wins, because we are doing things right. We do have an effective organization and organizations serving the needs of this community. And is that an okay model, or are we used to municipality models and things like that? So I think there's an opportunity to, take a moment and go, we are doing things right, and we are getting forward, and we're making things happen. I was probably the youngest person on the team. I mean, not the youngest in age, but formerly working in a structured municipality county government model. And we talked about a lot of that. And there's this thought that, well, if we become a government, oh, well, everybody will have a voice better and everybody will have this. And I had to raise my hand, like, that's not actually the case. Once you have a group of people that are in a leadership role, a community tends to just take a step back and go, well, they're paid to do this and solve these problems for us. And I was really encouraging again that in this community, look at this room right now, we are discussing the future, and look how many people are here. Because if you go to a normal municipality, there might be 10 or 12 people showing up. So I think, again, we have some magic here in our community that people want to be involved. And what are we trying to fix? And that was an honest discussion that we took throughout this whole process. So, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Gaither Bivens. I run the food bank here in Big Sky. I've always been totally agnostic about Big Sky incorporating and really unsophisticated. I mostly just cared about whether or not we'd be able to wander around town with beer in our hands still. But then COVID hit, and I felt personally responsible for feeding hundreds of the workforce that had been laid off. And when that happened, the first phone call I got was not from a state agency or a city office. It was from Resort Tax, wondering what they could do and how they could help. And they responded quickly. So that got me curious. If we incorporated, would that change? Would our ability to respond to emergencies change? Or if we incorporated, could we make that into a sustainable structure going forward? So that was kind of my lens for being involved in this group. And what I learned is that incorporation has nothing to do with our open container laws.
Thank you. That was one of my questions too. My name is Enian Williams. I work with Outlaw Partners. I'm also in the Transportation District and the Gallatin River Task Force. Lived in Big Sky for 33 years. I have watched this town grow from sagebrush fields over here on the side of the road to what it is today, and watched the progression of leadership and things in Big Sky progress. So I was interested in being a part of it. I had heard, like Sarah said, a lot of the rumors of different things that it may do to the community. And being one that has watched this town grow and manage itself over the years so very well, I also thought, how might, if it doesn't come up to one of these scenarios, just how might the organizations that are running the town incorporate better themselves and really come up with maybe some new ideas of how we can incorporate the different districts and boards and things that people volunteer for in a better way. I think that we learned a lot and through this process, and I commend everybody for coming on it. And now our community has a lot of decisions to make on what to do next.
I'm Dan O'Connor. I'm the Executive Director of the Big Sky Community Housing Trust, though I don't think that probably had much to do with my being on the group. I spent 15-20 years on the Chamber Board, and Sarah mentioned there were 3 efforts at incorporation, and I think I was there for all 3 of them. I was there when Kate built her binder, Kate and Dick Fast, and Steve Johnson and I, and a couple others spent the better part of a couple of years every night holed up in the meeting room at the water and sewer office, hearing from various people and trying to learn everything we could. And we started to understand at that point how much misinformation and misunderstanding there is. And we were just trying to nobody was trying to deceive anybody. It's just, this is really, really complicated. Most counties in Montana, date back to statehood. Most cities in Montana, I think the last incorporation we had was almost 20 years ago in Montana at all. This is difficult to do. And the laws are somewhat Byzantine. And so for me, what I really wanted to see come out of this was really the first kind of unencumbered, fact-based. I believe very much in this community's ability to get together and address difficult problems just because we've done it so much. And just looking past the 35 years that I've been here, there's quite a bit that we've accomplished that other cities in Montana look to with envy, but just sort of felt like whatever we were considering, we didn't have all the information. So I was really hoping out of this is that we would have a fact-based model that we could decide to stay the same, decide to do something different, but whatever it was, that it was based on facts that we all share. And what I learned is we're a town full of nerds.
Hi, I'm Katie Bryce, and I started, hi, guys. I started on the committee because I am a team member at Big Sky Resort, Bourne Resorts. I've served for many years on the chamber board and including as chair, and I've also served on the WIA board, Wellness in Action, for many years as well. So kind of got a unique perspective about some of these nonprofit needs that exist out there. I attended the very first kind of my introduction at the water and sewer for the one 15 years ago, Kate and the binder, and it was very lively. And I walked out of there as I think a 24, 25-year-old with wide eyes saying, I don't even know these people, but there's a lot of passion within this community. I also started marketing Big Sky Resort, Meg, and we would start in the funnel by showing people where we were at the Peter Glenn Ski Show in Fort Lauderdale. This is where Montana is. And then today, I just shared an article that we were ranked the #1 destination for tourism by NBC. And to see how far we've grown in that amount of time is incredible, but my gosh, there's a lot of responsibility with that as well. And so that's why my involvement is there. And what did I learn? I've learned that we are nerdy, yes. And also, my gosh, look what we can get done by this community and all volunteers in a lot of ways. It is so impressive, and I've learned a lot.
Coming over to Tally Lancey.
Thanks, Meg. I'm Tally Lancey, and I've been involved with this group for a while. For a little bit of context, I have been the past chair of Big Sky Community Organization, as well as the Arts Council of Big Sky, and was in the same room as Katie 15 years ago. And I don't have Kate's binder, but I have Steve Johnson's map in my basement, and the book that he gave me on governing Montana's grassroots. It's not that interesting, but if anyone wants a copy, I have an extra. And a few years ago, Steve Johnson, Tim Kent, and I started not a super PAC, but sort of a micro PAC, Political Action Committee, to begin to really look at how we could possibly self-organize better. We weren't looking at what isn't going well. We were curious about what could we do better. And we generated some momentum. Many of the people who were on the subcommittee were involved in that group. What we heard or what we learned through that very cursory look at potentially self-governing was it was too complicated. That's sort of the buzzword so far. And we realized that we as volunteers were not qualified to dig into this. And then we partnered with Resort Tax, and the subcommittee became curated and has been just an awesome group of people. So I am really happy to be at this place now where we can think about the future, how to create a really durable structure that works for all of us, that is open to your vote. That's, I think, a major word that I want us to all be thinking about tonight is how can we have a vote? Thanks.
Hey, thank you, subcommittee. And Michelle Horning is on the committee. She couldn't be here tonight, and her sentiments are echoed in everybody's comments. And I will just
read her final sentence. She talks about complicated, and her final sentence is, "It was important to me that we produce a clear, factual, and financially grounded document so everyone in Big Sky can be truly informed when it comes time to make decisions about our future." Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, subcommittee. And with that, let's get into the work of WGM and Echo Northwest.
One slide.
Getting ahead already.
Sorry. You just did the introductions. We have a few more things to go through tonight, and we're gonna step through report outline. I'm Dylan Pipinich, WGM Group. Everybody else had this big introduction. I'm just gonna kind of leave it at that. I think I've met most of you. WGM led the process with Meg and some pretty significant community engagement that led into how we pulled this report together. The report is it's going to be a very useful tool for everybody in this room. I think even more so than what was realized when the subcommittee was established and this project was started. So we're going to kind of go through the report and what it is and how to use it, even outside of, you know, the scenario evaluation. So we'll go through the report outline and process. The report is very large. It's with all of the appendices, including all the survey stuff. I mean, we're binders. It's quite large. But we're going to go through the outline and the process to get there, an overview of the elements. And this report is really something that we're not expecting everybody to read, but it's a encyclopedia type of report where when you need information, you can pick it up and you can go to a page and you get that information. You can start to understand. And I hope that everybody reads it. We've read it several times. Jenny's read it 3 times in the last week. And for me, it's good information. And just the fact that all these people are in this room is surprising enough that I guess probably some of you will read the whole thing. So, but we'll go through how to use it, the key findings from each section, and then that scenario evaluation. And then Echo Northwest and Sarah's here. And we're going to talk about some assumptions we made, because a big question that we're answering here is, how much does this stuff cost? Good. We kind of heard all of this from the subcommittee. This is kind of a timeline of you know, the last 20 plus years of what's going on, and there's a lot more points that could be on this, but this is some of the larger ones. And we're at the end here in 2024 where they started the governance study, and it took, we're 13, 14 months in or something like that, and happy to be here tonight. So Jenny, the report outline. These are the elements that are in the report. The existing conditions is largely based on the existing conditions report that we published like last January or something like that. That was a strong evaluation of how Big Sky operates today. Forecasting and trends, we really tied that with the capital improvements plan and census data and all the documents that Big Sky is using to move forward prior to this, so that we're comparing apples to apples. The community engagement took a real effort here. We realized right at the start that this is a community conversation that's going to pack this room every time we do this. And if you look around, it's important that to realize that that's what drove all of the outcomes and all of the meaningfulness that's going to come out of this report was conversations with everybody that's in this room. You're going to see things in the report that I think you're going to pick out to yourself, be like, hey, I had that conversation with the team and that was included. Jim, I'm picking on you right now. You're gonna notice some of that. Keep going around the room. There's a lot of faces that I've seen every single time. That engagement evolved into the evaluation framework, and that was based all on themes that we got from the community engagement. We pestered everybody until we got the same answers from everybody all the time. So that's how you know that you've
done a adequate amount of community engagement, and finally everybody's like, we told you this, we're worried about representation, we told you this, we're wondering what services we could have that we don't already have, we've mentioned this before, so then we're like, okay, we'll stop asking. That evaluation framework is how we started analyzing the scenarios that we came up with that the subcommittee helped choose was based on those themes. And the themes from the engagement went right into the scenario evaluation so that we're evaluating what matters to the community. And then on top of that is the fiscal analysis and then of course the conclusion. How to use the report. Like I said, this isn't something that's, meant to be read like a novel that you have to start at the beginning and finish at the end. It's going to be a resource for the community. It presents some clear information about governance options and allows you to compare some things side by side. But really, there's an ancillary thing that we started realizing when we were writing the report that's coming out of this is that it's a real good documentation and understanding of the community values of all the conversations we've been having for the last year. All of the public input that we've had and that we've reached out, one-on-one conversations with Meg in her office to the scenario toolkit stuff that we did before, all of that is combined in this document so that the community can have a voice with whatever you choose to do from here on out. For those of you that weren't step-by-step with us, this was kind of the circle of engagement of all the different things we've done. We've, had the website, we've been to numerous board meetings, joint commission meetings, the newsletters, community week, all of the public meetings, this being the fourth one. And we've tied that all together and really tried to create a community voice so that we can answer some of those long lingering questions. And then we turned that engagement into these themes. And that's the basis for the report. And the themes, if you all have the sheet of paper that was sitting on your seat when you walked in, those community defined priorities are themes. And that's what we evaluated all the scenarios against is the community representation. That was something that consistently came up time and time again, where when there's times where people didn't feel represented or they could feel like representation could be better, and what does that mean to you? That coordination of service gaps thing, that question that comes up all the time, what do we have or what don't we have that other communities have, either they're incorporated or otherwise? What are we really going to provide if we change a government structure? Implementation barriers, how hard is it going to be? Is it something that's even possible? Do we go down these long roads with no real clear benefit? Impacts to resort tax, everybody made it pretty clear in that community engagement that resort tax is a powerful tool and it helps the community move forward. We don't want to risk that. Resort tax is a little bit different here, being a resort tax district. It's not a resort tax town because you're not a municipality, and that means some different things. And we don't want to risk that. And then, of course, that fiscal responsibility is taxes are expensive for people. And what does this do to your tax bill? Is it worth it? Those are the things that we called out and evaluated these scenarios against, including the fiscal stuff. We even stepped out from that and talked to some peer communities, some resort communities to see, do you have tools available to you that help you deal with high impacts from tourism and the costs of that the Big Sky doesn't have? We're looking for any recommendations or anything that could help. And then, of course, the baseline, and that's the existing conditions. That's that report that we put out. That's how you're operating today and what that costs. So that all those together is the evaluation framework that we then take and look at each scenario so that we can compare apples to apples. The scenario analysis, we brought up the existing conditions report, dug it out of the server, and opened it back up and said, that's the baseline. That's what we're gonna look against everything at, is how you're doing things today. All of the different service districts, resort tax and everything, how everything's paid for, all the different nonprofits and service providers, both public, nonprofit and private. And then the next scenario is that basic incorporation scenario. And that's the elected mayor and a couple council members and just the kind of that lean form of municipal government that provides some of that representation. The goal of that was that first theme is that community representation kind of thing. This and the expanded incorporation scenario is a scenario that has a little bit more robust government. These are kind of the two political views of government here from a local government, municipal government standpoint, small government and larger government. And so these were chosen so that you can see the difference between the two, especially from a cost perspective and what you get from that cost. The third new scenario outside of that baseline is the create a county scenario. And the reason that one was chosen by the team in the subcommittee is that that's the one that keeps local taxes as much as possible local. It's also the hardest one to achieve by far. And then there was a bunch of things that we noticed as we were going on. I don't know if you noticed in the back of the room, and there was a meeting last week. There's also this 10-year local study commission going on in both Madison and Gallatin counties, where these elected study commissioners are reviewing the current form of government. And we thought that the timing of this made a lot of sense to, as we're writing this report, that there's some alternatives that are in the current form of government that we thought should be mentioned because they meet some of these community goals as well. So that's in the report as well. The analysis for each scenario, like I said, it's quite large. We're going to kind of go through these to give a general understanding and then start a conversation here. But it's the boundary, the population and taxable value. That's the information that the ECHO team uses to make a pseudo government budget is what they ended up doing. The legal constraints and statutory authority, what gives the local government a right to form, that's something that's given by the state government. And what the legal constraints, like we talked about population and county size, things like that. The process requirements, how you would actually go about doing that. And the special considerations, and those are those things. This is a real interesting part of the document that, as the subcommittee went around and we're talking about what they wanted to learn. Not all of those had to do with representation, service gaps, all of that. These are some things that were noticed that would change if the form of government was changed to that. And that's things like liquor licenses and gambling licenses and things like the state entitlement distribution and equalization, school taxes, things like that. How does that change when your government changes? Then we go through those evaluation criteria and lay out what that does to representation. If there's any services that are missing that it would be accomplishing, or how it's coordinating services, implementation barriers and such. And then the last part of each analysis is the fiscal analysis. That's where the ECHO team actually created these balance sheets or budgets for these forms of government with assumptions of full-time employee equivalents and amount of road maintenance and things like that. The overall outcomes, we're going to hit some of the high points of some of these before we start this discussion. In that current service delivery scenario, representation, when you look at representation of how you're doing it now, I don't know, does anybody know in the room of how many elected officials you have in Big Sky? How many of your district boards are elected versus appointed? Or how many people represent you, whether they're elected or appointed? It's a lot. I don't really know either, but as far as the service districts, there's a lot of people out there. And what we noticed is it's from a shortened window, right? You have a lot of people that represent you. You have people that represent resort tax. So you have people that represent the fire district or whatever special district that they're in charge of, and that's their purview. So you have this patchwork of service providers. However, you do have the coordinating committee and you're working really hard as to how those service districts communicate with each other and how the community communicates with each other. For the basic incorporation scenario, that's the bottom tier of the minimal municipal government that you can have kind of thing. That's elected mayor with a boundary that's around the resort from Mountain Village down to town center. That area, that's where most of the population lies to meet that implementation barrier thing. And then you take over some things in that scenario with like planning and zoning and building codes and some of those things that weren't necessarily gaps, but were mentioned time and time again in the community engagement of we can do these things better or we're not doing them at all. And that ended up about 43 mills for a mill levy. I don't know if anybody understands mill levy. We're going to go about it, explain it a little bit better in the future, what that means from a tax perspective. But a mill is, you know, 0.1%.
The amount of tax that can be collected per thousand.
Yeah, for $1,000.
Will you repeat that so the people online? And the recording? Well,
It's a amount of property tax per $1,000 of taxable valuation.
Hi, sorry, I
Not
forgot to
working.
turn- Is it working?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Okay, I was just gonna say it's the amount of property tax that can be collected per $1,000 of assessed value. And I'm sorry, I didn't have my mic on earlier.
We're gonna go through what mills and the taxes and all that mean when we do the fiscal analysis. But just to compare these scenarios, the expanded incorporation scenario, that's a lot more robust government. That's where you have, you know, the first one we were talking about like a contracted city attorney. We're talking about in-house more, the FTEs are going from 10 to 12 to, you know, 60 plus people and taking care of roads and a lot of public works and stuff like that. And that's about twice as expensive. That's twice the mills each year. The created county scenario, like I said, keeps the majority or the most possible of your tax dollars, as we've talked about, and we're going to see some example tax bills where, you know, your property taxes don't all go to the county. Matter of fact, most of it goes to the schools. And those things we're going to talk about the piece of the pie that we're talking about switching out here. And you'll see how big of that piece of that pie is. It's not your whole tax bill. That is 29 mills in the county and 38 in the city for whatever that adds up to be 67 or something like that. The thing to note about that created county scenario is there's some significant implementation barriers, both tied to state statute and size requirements and things like that, plus the voting that's required to do that. And then I was talking about those alternatives. You know, there's some things that you can do to help with representation, coordination of service gaps, and, you know, fiscal responsibility in that. And it's looking to strengthen some special districts or combine some special districts, create more incremental enhancements to representation. You know, there's community councils and things like that you can do. And this is kind of all of that purview of that local government study commission that's going on now. And if you have more questions about that, I think Jackie's your person to talk to right there. They had a meeting last week, and I think there's some more coming up. But this was tied close enough to that study commission. This project was that we thought that we could help out and show some other things just allowed by state law that your current form of government can do. And one of those that I find really interesting myself is also a county charter for both Madison and Gallatin County. That would free up get some availability to get creative. And county charters are really one of those things that Big Sky.
sorry, the Zoom keeps just
It's a very special situation. So that's something to consider as that goes on, and the report explains more of it there. Go ahead, Jenny. Yeah, some of those special considerations that we're talking about, and maybe outside of those community themes or the evaluation criteria, there's Of course, over the last 20+ years, there's been some very clever people that have looked at this and have actually asked the Attorney General some opinions of things like, can you incorporate across the county line? Or things like, can you still have a resort tax district with a incorporated community inside of it? Those are two specific things that have Attorney General opinions attached to them. Those opinions are in appendix in the report. But it basically says, yes, you can, his opinion is that, yes, you can incorporate across the county line. And that because the resort tax was created prior, that it shouldn't have any effect on it. And those are attorney's opinions. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to make an opinion on that, of course, but Attorney General's opinions are very helpful things. The liquor licenses and gambling, one thing that came up a lot was if you incorporate, you limit the amount of liquor licenses you can have in that incorporated boundary. And the best that I could say is that liquor licenses are the amount of them are calculated different for municipalities than they are for counties. It's all based on population. If you look at your one-page handout here, I'm going to call that under the assumptions, that 2,357 number, that is the estimated resident population within the incorporation boundary that we looked at for the report. That's within the Mount Village, Town Center, Mount Village. So you're all used to hearing a 3,600 number or whatever. These are the people that live in that boundary. So when we're talking about things like density for incorporation requirements or the population that would be used to estimate the number of liquor licenses available, that's this number in that incorporation boundary, and that only affects that boundary. So there's 1,300 people or so that live outside of that boundary in Big Sky. Incorporation scenarios open up some other doors as well. There's federal grant programs like CDBG. There's things that only municipal governments can apply for from a grant perspective. You can open up, fuel tax revenues or tax increment financing. And in the expanded incorporation, that's the one that was evaluated with a charter. There's charter benefits. There's two types of local governments, and one is general governing powers, and one is self-governing powers. General governing powers allow the municipality to do anything that the state says that you can do. So in state code, in Montana Code Annotated, it'll say general governing powers allows you to govern X, Y, and Z. And then you don't get anything outside of that. Self-governing powers, which you have to have adopted self-governing powers to have a charter, it's the exact opposite. It says you can do anything you want to do, as long as the state says that you can't do it. So the state will say you can't do X, Y, and Z. And as long as they don't say you can't do it, then it's assumed that you can. So it kind of sounds like the same thing, but it opens up some availability to make some creative decisions, which is important for a group of creative people. Some of the new considerations for the new county scenario, that dual transition. To create a county, you need a county seat. So you need a municipality before you have a county. We'll just like to say that the study team, because of the size and the scope of the work, we didn't consider going all the way down to West Yellowstone because we didn't feel it would be appropriate to put West Yellowstone in a new county without speaking to West Yellowstone. We're not going to promise Big Sky that West Yellowstone's good with it, just, and we didn't want to start all over and go down there and have a year's conversations with them. If they'd like to, they can give me a call after this. But so that includes creating a city around Mountain Village, Town Center, Meadow Village, and then creating a new county and seceding from both Madison and Gallup counties. One thing that I think to mention is Montana Code has these limits of you can't reduce a county to less than $12 million valuation or something like that. These are are limits that were set when it was written. And that if Big Sky were to go down this path, my guess is there would be some legislative look at these limits to make sure that they're still pertinent, because reducing the county to less than $12 million valuation is, in this day and age, not, it doesn't even matter. I mean, that's a couple of properties. One thing that I keep flagging in both of these is that BizRad status. There is that Attorney General's opinion that says that the district was created and none of this is going to affect it. That is just an Attorney General's opinion. And when you start looking at statute of resort tax districts are to be created in places where there's not a municipality. Take that for what you will. If somebody were to challenge, now that there's a municipality after the resort district was created, is it a risk? I don't know. It was worth mentioning. Again, we're not an attorney, but there's a lot of situations in Montana code. And when you read the code and it talks about like seceding from one county, I don't think there's not a section of Montana code that says this is how you create a county from two counties. This is how you do this very unique situation where the code doesn't really align with the situation here. And it should be, really considered. And my guess is that if this scenario was chosen, the legislature would probably take a hard look at those statutes. And then the new county you need a lot of infrastructure. You need to build a police station and, have a courthouse and things like that. We didn't consider that cost. We were just talking about operating costs, but it should be mentioned that there's capital costs to doing so. It could be very expensive. One thing I really wanted to mention at this point, we went through all the scenarios, and the subcommittee went around and talked about their reasons. One thing you'll really recognize, and I'm sure that you'll recognize from the comments and the discussion that we're about to have, is that there's a broad range of differing opinions on this. And when we first started the project, it's like, this sounds like a giant pros and cons list. Like, this will be fun. And then we realized that we started going down this path and thinking something is positive, and the person right next to you is, I don't want that at all. So that there's a difference in opinion there, what's positive or negative. So we're not going to label it that way. These are impacts. You decide for yourself whether that's something that's positive for the community or negative for the community. And really it comes down to, especially when you look at the difference between basic incorporation and expanded incorporation, why it is divisive became really clear to me, because if you compare those two scenarios, you're looking at small government, large government. You're looking at basically the same belief system as our two political parties. As we know, that's 49-51 altering from, every 4 years, that it's the differences are based on personal opinion. And we really did not want to bring that into this. So everything that I listed before aren't positives or negatives. They're just changes. And to keep that in mind moving forward. So the report benefits, obviously you get this detailed analysis of these 3 different paths that could be taken, plus a really hard look at what you're doing right now and the successes that you've had. That existing conditions report that's an appendix of this is actually longer than the report. It was harder to detail how you're operating now than it was to detail 3 different paths forward. That's not to say that it's not good. Getting that positive and negative. So yeah, we're hoping that you're not just looking at the scenarios of this. This is a foundation, for the future, to the point where we spent a year talking to the community, and I feel like I know a lot of you better than some of the people in Butte where I live, as far as getting stuff together. So it's and we've really documented their community engagement well. And I think that these community themes my guess is that everybody in this room cares about at least most of them. You care about how you're represented and the people that are making the decisions for you, and that you have the services you need to be a successful community, and that you understand the problems going forward from an implementation barriers, whether it's a scenario or not. The first way to tackle a problem is to understand it. I think most of you probably really want to protect resort tax because it's how you're accomplishing a lot of the things that you're accomplishing. And then I think that that fiscal responsibility part, that you want the taxes that you're paying to be best representing you as a community and benefiting your community the best that you can. So I think that those themes are meaningful in any community decision that you're going to make. And that when you're thinking about anything, whether it's a community topic about something to do with a special district outside of incorporation, that you look at the work that we've done here and help that make your decision. And I think we'll stop here, and the Echo Northwest team is going to present all the real fun financial aspects of all the three scenarios, but I think we're opening it up to questions for anything that I presented.
Anyone want to kick us off? Question?
Jenny.
Thanks again for all your work and putting this together. Just a quick question. You talked at a number of points, really hammering home the question of challenges to the resort tax stats, and I think everybody agrees that that's really important. I'm just curious if in your discussions with folks in Whitefish, which is incorporated, or Red Lodge, which is incorporated, anybody raised any specific threats that they saw to the status of the resort tax in their communities? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the conversation we had with Whitefish is a really good example in how other places implement their resort tax is their resort towns or resort cities, right? And it's in their municipal code of what they're going to collect the taxes on and what they're going to spend them on. And a lot of them, like Whitefish, has a large portion of it where it just goes into the general fund and they offset property taxes with it. So when you do that, it's kind of hard to really figure out where those dollars are going, you know what I mean? And so they haven't, and I understand your question, I'm getting there, sorry, I'm kind of getting drug out here. The threat to resort tax, I'm not even gonna call it a threat. The question around resort tax here is, this is such a different situation that hasn't happened in any area. So when you're evaluating the resort area district, state law says a district must be in an unincorporated area. It's never happened where they've incorporated inside a district before, right? So that's why years ago, I think it was, maybe in 2008 or something like that, where they had this attorney general's opinion. And the answer at that time was, the district was created first. There's nothing in state law says you can't incorporate inside of an already formed district, and it wouldn't affect it at all. And then it was just left at that, and that's a district. The point that we were making is that anytime that there's large changes like this, or there's opposition to large changes like this, it opens that door to other interpretations at some point in time. But as far as resort tax in general, we haven't got a sense of anybody from a legislative perspective coming after resort tax or wanting to change resort tax. Most communities that are using it very successfully. Most of the other communities I talked to said it's very helpful. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without it. And when I asked them if it's enough to cover the impacts of the high volume of tourism, they say absolutely not. But we realize that tourism drives the economy, and we're okay with that. And that's how we build our business. Does that answer?
Yeah.
So I have a question. I live in the Canyon. And we're not included in this. And I don't understand why, because the resort tax boundary does go there. We also have the fire boundary goes down there, as well as up on the mountain. It seems ridiculous that we're not included, but I don't know why that happened. The other question I have is, when this went to the legislators at one point, there was something in there that allowed non-resident property owners to vote. And that was a big battle, fighting that.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious if anybody brought up who could vote in this.
Yeah. To your first question, the canyon isn't included inside the incorporation boundary that we evaluated because of a population density issue. To include the residents that live in the canyon, and incorporated boundaries have to be contiguous. It included too much of that dead space so that your community would be too large with too little people. The canyon is included in the Creative County scenario. That is included of almost the entire BizRad boundary, minus the public lands on the east side. So you are included in the report, in the document. You're just in that third scenario, and you're in the existing conditions scenario that looks at the whole census designated place for the whole area. Your second question, as far as who can vote, statute says that registered voters of the counties vote, or if it's the incorporation, it's registered voters that reside within the incorporation boundary.
Let's keep it rolling. Anybody else? All right, let's get into the fiscal side. Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it is warm. My cheeks were burning. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Emmons. I'm sorry that I'm sitting and I'm also not very tall anyway, but we have a lot of information to cover, and my colleague Leanne, Ryan, and I are gonna tag team. So hopefully this works, and just wave your arm if you need something from me. So I've met you before a couple of times. I won't go too much into my background, but I like the title Fiscal Ladies, which Sarah and I both use. So I'm half of the Fiscal Ladies, I guess, as part of this project. And I wanted to kind of just take a brief moment to orient the fiscal information that you're about to hear, because it is a lot of numbers and calculations, and part of it is just my responsibility as a fiscal analyst. We have like what I like to call the fine print, you know, like in the pharmaceutical commercial when they talk really fast and it's a big caveat. So that's the case with any fiscal analysis. There's always a lot of assumptions that you need to make. You're working with what you know. You're working with what you don't know, but you think you know, and then at a certain point, you're literally making stuff up using the best information that you have. So we'll try to delineate where we're kind of making those breaks. But I also think it's important to talk about what we know and what we don't know, because one of the most interesting aspects of this work, at least for me and Leanne, was really like learning about how this community operates and pays for services already as an unincorporated area. I've never seen an unincorporated area like this, and we've worked all over the Northwest and Mountain West together. So lots of information to draw from. So starting with what we know what property values and levies look like here in 2025. Those all just came out, and if you're a property owner, you're familiar with them. What we don't know is what those will look like next year, in part because there are major changes that have happened at the legislature that will affect what those values are. And in part because we don't know where those 2,400 people that Dylan mentioned actually live. We're using a lot of information that's really rich that this community has invested a lot to understand from the CIP, from work the chamber sponsored about where we think those people live, but we're still making assumptions about them. But when we did map that data of where we think people live to the property data that we have from DOR, there's some really interesting aspects that Leanne and I would like to talk about. And the pieces that we just made up are the hypothetical governments. Again, we use those other communities, and Leanne will talk a lot about those. But at the end of the day, they're just assumptions. And so we're happy to take questions about them, but you're really interested in how you would pay for it.
All right, so we'll start with kind of the existing fiscal base, the tax base. Within the BizRat boundary, which is a proxy for the new county scenario, the total market value is about 36.8 billion with roughly 700 million in taxable value. The tax base is overwhelmingly residential. Sure, no surprise to you on that. About 90% of all taxable value comes from the residential properties. And the commercial properties make up about 5%, and then the combined agricultural and timber land makes up the other 5%. We did a little heat map exercise. So the map on the screen, which not great quality, on this projector highlights the highest value properties clustered west and southwest of Lone Mountain, shown in the dark purple, which you're not seeing very well, but the darkest color on the map there. So many of those properties exceed 6 million in market value per acre. And so they represent a really small share of parcels, but they contribute a disproportionate share of both market and taxable value in BizRat. So just an important note as we kind of run through these scenarios, those properties won't fall inside the incorporation boundaries. They'll just be present in the county scenario. So they won't be driving in the small corporations. So I think we talked a little bit about how we looked at peer communities. So mostly to understand what it takes to run a small resort community, we looked at 4, primarily Montana resort towns. We looked a little bit outside the state, Keystone, not much more focus there, but Whitefish, Red Lodge, Columbia Falls, and West Yellowstone, because of the somewhat, I'll caveat that, somewhat similar dynamics with Big Sky, tourism-driven economies, seasonal fluctuation, and high service demand because of the tourism economies. We also looked at Butte Silver Bow, our hometown hero here, to benchmark how those services are structured within a county government. And just one thing to note is that all communities, even of similar size, can make really different choices about their local values, community priorities, and even historical service responsibilities. So it's not just about population count and how they structure their government. So this is a really intense table. I'm not going to go through all of it, but we found that staffing levels vary dramatically. So to my earlier point, so we found from 7 FTE, which is full-time employee, from 7 FTE per 1,000 residents in Columbia Falls to 27 FTE per 1,000 in West Yellowstone. And so this just tells us that there's no single model for a municipal organization in those small towns, and that some rely really heavily on in-house staff, some contract out positions, and then some just keep their departments really small. Whitefish here really stands out as the largest peer community that we looked at. They keep a lot of their staff in-house. They have over 120 FTEs. They have a really robust parks department, public works, and public safety departments. So you kind of see where their values are. West Yellowstone has the smallest population, but they have the highest staff density. So that's pretty interesting to look at. And we just looked at these because they just helped us understand scale. Again, we didn't copy and paste any of these models into our modeling. They were just a helpful reference point.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, one other thing to point out about the responsibilities is kind of going back to one of our earlier presentations, and actually what Dylan mentioned in one of his slides is that there are a lot of services that are offered by other entities, some with elected boards and some that are nonprofits like the Housing Trust that provide some services that might be provided by a city government in those other communities, but are provided outside of a city government in these scenarios, because what WGM and Meg were hearing from you all is kind of the set of services that were shown, will be shown in the next few slides. So this is a slide, and the quality of these is my fault that sorry you can't read it. I didn't realize how it would look when it was projected. So this is a slide showing the other side of the ledger for 3 of these same communities, just to kind of show you the range of revenues that are used to pay for services there. So gosh, it looks like dark brown on the bottom, is property tax, and you can't read the number, but between 11% and 26% of city budgets that we looked at were funded by property tax. That orange piece in the middle is the resort tax, and this is where Dylan mentioned in answering another question that these cities use property tax to literally offset. It's called a property tax offset. They keep their property taxes lower with an infusion or an allocation of resort tax revenues. So come together, those two revenue sources are at least 50% of the city budget in the 3 resort communities that we looked at. The green shaded area is intergovernmental revenues, and Dylan mentioned one stream on this, and it's a little bit more commercial than the BizRad boundary. Leanne had mentioned that was 5% commercial. This is 9% commercial, which should track for all of you knowing what's concentrated in this area. The other piece that was really interesting, and this kind of gets into what we know and don't know, but what we think we know. So WGM did some mapping of the CIP information about residential units and how many of them are and populations or full-time, seasonal, and visitor populations. And then what we did was we took their analysis of what was happening in the incorporated boundary, and we had to map it and line it up with the Department of Revenue data. We had a pretty decent sample of primary residents, and Echo Northwest Leanne led an analysis there to look at homestead exemption applications, and even kind of looking at how the property owner addresses were looking in the parcel data. And so we have a pretty good sample, and that really gave us our average values. And the reason that matters, sorry I'm talking so long, but this is really important. The reason that matters is that next year, your tax bills will change again, depending on whether you're live in a primary owner occupied home or a long-term rental, or have a seasonal property or short-term rental. So that's why we really had to understand that, because we needed to kind of dynamic tax base, and we needed to make assumptions about what would happen next year. But when we were doing that analysis, we found out some kind of interesting stuff. So that's just a donut chart that shows you roughly what we think the residential property tax base looks like. And it's about a third, which I hope makes sense to you. It did to me. Somebody's raising their hand in the back.
Right, am I looking at this correctly, that the clubs are included in the incorporated boundary?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Why is that here?
Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, I can answer. So they were excluded because.
Oh, the question
Was why aren't the clubs included in the incorporation boundary? And the reason for that is the number of permanent residences. So there's very, very few permanent residences inside the club boundary, and the scale is large enough to where we're really paying attention to that need for population density that's a statute requirement. So hope that answers your question.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. And thanks, Dylan. I think this is you, man.
There's supposed to be a chart there.
Give me a second, I can get it pulled up. It didn't save for some reason.
Sorry, I've got it. Board chart. So the basic incorporation scenario, Dylan talked a little bit about it at the beginning. So just as a reminder, it's reflects a pretty lean, locally focused city government, providing really basic core services with a really small staff of about 10 to 12 FTEs between 2026 and 2023. So by the time you get to 2023, we would have grown to 12 FTEs. Services include a pretty basic planning and code enforcement department, public works, really basic administration functions, and a contracted law enforcement piece. And then costs and revenues tracked closely, as you'll see here on the chart. Operating costs grow from 3.8 million to 5.6 by 2033, and projected property tax revenue slightly exceeds those costs. So you're making more money than you're spending. Law enforcement and public works are the primary cost drivers in this scenario.
So Leanne mentioned in the first, questions,
What's included in public works? I think just in that one basic road maintenance.
Yeah, so the question is, what is included in public works? So there's this section in state statute that says if you incorporate as a municipality, all the county roads that are inside your boundary now become city roads. You would need a public works department to maintain that. The road data for Big Sky is very hard to follow. We had an assumption of 25% of the roads, I believe, in scenario one, would be maintained by the municipality.
That was a good way to answer that question. Yeah, the road data were difficult, which is probably a theme that's familiar to all of you. So that $4 million that Leanne mentioned in the first year of incorporation, which we assume just to have a starting point, I think was 2026, although obviously any kind of change would take much longer than that, but just to have a baseline that fell within the CIP. The millage required to cover that $4 million, again, only with property tax revenues, would be about $42.50 per $1,000 of taxable value. And this is where what I was blabbering on about a minute ago really comes into play, because there are assumed differences in the value of an owner-occupied home within this area and a second home within this area. There are also going to be assumed differences between those two values and the county area outside of it. So the numbers there on the chart show the tax liability for the labels fell off, but I think they go owner-occupied home on the left, second home in the middle, and then the one on the right is assumed to be a short-term rental, which has a lower assumed value than those other two properties. I don't know what happened to the labels there. And again, as Dylan mentioned, and we'll have a slide at the end that really brings all of this to life. This tax would be imposed on top of all existing levies. So any other levy you pay, depending on which county you live in, you still have the county levies and all other districts that you pay taxes to.
Get the graph.
Here.
Got it.
So this is the expanded incorporation scenario. So it has a slightly more robust city government. And it includes the city manager, finance and HR functions, more of a community development department compared to just kind of zoning and code enforcement. So a little bit more long range planning. Again, public works with more roads that they're responsible for, and a new local police department. And I think this one also has legal and judicial services contracted out. So staffing grows from about 24 to 28 FTEs by 2033. And then costs rise from 7.7 million to 11.2 million by 2033. Again, driven higher service expectations and responsibilities. Again, public works and law enforcement continue to be the kind of major cost drivers. But still making more money than you're spending.
So the millage required to cover that $7.7 million in year one is 86 per $1,000 of taxable value. And again, we have a variation here that shows, depending on what type of residential property we're talking about, what the difference in tax liability would be. So you see on the left there, the difference in the tax liability for the average owner-occupied home basically doubles under the expanded incorporation scenario. Actually, it does under all homes. It's twice as many mills. Anyway, so you can kind of see the impact there. And again, this would also be on top of any existing mills that this property owner already pays. So now we're taking a look at that GISRAD map again. And again, just a reminder of the numbers: market value of 37 billion, taxable value of 700 million. So obviously much higher, stronger, higher value tax base means fewer mills, depending on the governance scenario. And within this space is assumed to be that incorporated community with the same tax base as previously described. So depending on whether this property owner would live inside the incorporated area or outside of the incorporated area, they would be paying different mills. We also have some assumptions again about how much homes are, what the average value of homes are within and without the outside of the incorporated area.
So now we're at the county scenario. So this is a layered model, where there would be 2 layers of government. Oh,
Hold on, Tyler.
Should have asked.
Hold on. Everybody online.
Right, and I should have asked this last slide, but we were talking about the number of FTEs based on the different, the small incorporation or the bigger incorporation. We had looked at that slide early on with Columbia Falls and Whitefish and Red Lodge and about the number of employees and parks and this and that. And I'm thinking like, we have a lot of, park employees. We have water and sewer employees. We already have a number of these type of employees that I didn't see any of them listed in either of those corporations scenarios. So if someone could just touch on that a little bit about where those services are going to kind of fill in, and maybe we kind of, based on how many Columbia Falls had and this and that.
I'll defer to Dylan, but our modeling assumes that the districts that you already have in place here stay the same, including the Parks District and the Water and Sewer District, because they're functioning really well. And honestly, the Parks District would be very expensive to fold into a municipal government. So we had it in one and we ended up taking it out.
Yeah, that's the best answer, is that the special districts that are already in place would remain. So the Parks District wouldn't become a municipal parks service. The only thing that is not true with that statement that I just said would be planning and zoning. That's the only thing that came up in building codes that came up that maybe could be done better just locally and not referred to. The planning and zoning is a part 1 zoning district administered by Gallatin County. And the thought there was to bring planning to the community. But other than that, Big Sky Water and Sewer stays Big Sky Water and Sewer, Fire District stays the Fire District. This is on top of everything you already have.
Can I have one more thing too? Because it's a point that I forgot to mention earlier. When costing out the law enforcement portion of this assumed government, Leanne mentioned that under the basic incorporation scenario would still have contracted law enforcement, just like the Resort Tax District has an arrangement with the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office currently. And actually, in interviewing the Sheriff's Office, we learned that the cost for an incorporated community to have that same level of service would be much higher, because you'd essentially be taking on the cost of the Madison County piece and some of the I don't know what you would call it, like subsidized costs that Gallatin County currently absorbs on behalf of the resort district, this new community would end up having to pay for. So there are assumptions there that are more explicitly detailed in the memo. But I just wanted to make that point because it's an important distinction about that first scenario. In the second scenario, you'd be assumed to have an in-house police department essentially. Then you have to have like a holding area. There's other costs that go along with it too. But the costs do end up actually being pretty close because they go up so dramatically from your current arrangement.
So the county scenario, Big Sky would operate with 2 layers of government. The new county would provide regional services, even though it would be kind of a small area for counties. And an incorporated community handling more localized functions. So you'd have, again, an incorporated community inside the larger county. The new county would have roles and responsibilities you commonly see. Dylan mentioned some of these earlier: commissioners, boards, the county attorney, the sheriff's services, and more county level public works responsibilities. And the incorporated community would have more hyper-local services, planning and code enforcement, more locally focused public works responsibilities, council, mayor, and more basic functions. And so this scenario models, the most complex governance structure. So we've got 2 charts, the county and the city here. So a newly formed county aligns with BizRad boundary, the newly incorporated community, you've already seen that boundary. So under this model, both governments have staffing and operating responsibilities. The county staffing grows from 61 to 70 FTEs by 2033, so it's quite large compared to the incorporated area we've been talking about. And then the city grows from 10 to 11.5 that same time period. And because the county will have, the sheriff's office, detention, courts, and all that kind of stuff, it's driving most of the revenues, or sorry, the costs for that scenario. So you're going from 18 million in 2026 to 27 million to in 2033. And then the city portion's a lot smaller, 3.4 million to 5.1 in 20. So again, you're still making more money than you're.
Thank you. So again, the high value homes that Leanne talked about in the beginning are concentrated outside of the incorporated boundary. So because the countywide levy can be taxed upon that strong tax base, it means the millage is less. But it also means that the cost of the incorporated services would really be concentrated on the relatively lower home value properties. It says weaker here, but it should say ones with lower value. And so this is the same chart that we showed earlier, showing the countywide levy as implemented on the different types of properties. And we have another, I don't know that chart is right now that I'm looking at it. I think we should focus on the one that there's one in a couple slides that I'll talk about that shows the tax liability across the different areas. And I think that'll kind of bring this point to life. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is Dylan and I are the tag team on this one because I have to say that I wanted to just show a picture of a tax bill, and I think he was like, that's too many numbers and it'd be really blurry. So the WGN really did the math here. But as we talked about with your property tax bill, you're paying property taxes to many, many different entities. And the piece that we're really focusing on here is just this gold slice. So go ahead, Don.
Yeah, so the point that we're trying to drive home here, because you're gonna see table in the next slide that shows some property taxes. And one of it's gonna say, if you live in Madison County, property tax was $757. And I think if that were true, we probably wouldn't have this discussion. That is the gold slice up here. So that property tax that we're talking about, when we're talking about creating a new county or the municipal taxes on top of all of it. But we're talking about creating a new county. We're talking about taking the county mills out of your current tax bill and replacing it with new county mills. If you're in Madison County, that's the gold sliver on the right. And if you're in Gallatin County, it's a little bit bigger gold piece of that pie on the left. If you look at the larger one of these, it's the school and the school equalization fund. So when we're talking about the mills that Madison County assessed last year was like 38 or 39 or something like that. And just the school equalization was 95. So your Madison County tax bill last year was, they assessed like 180 mills total. In this example that we're going to show you, just 38 of them or something like that go to the county for county provided services. So we're talking about replacing your current county governments with a new county, and you're seeing these tax numbers. We're just talking about a portion of your tax bill. We don't think that your tax bill in Madison County last year was $757, just to clarify.
Thanks, Dylan. It's a really important point that we'll talk about on the next slide too. But I remembered what that chart was. So can you go back a slide? There was a point to it. I was looking at it thinking that doesn't make sense. So the point of this chart is to show you the difference in assumed average value among these different types of residential properties, depending on whether you're in the incorporated area, which is the dark green, or you're outside of it, which is the lighter side. So you can see what we think we know about the second home property values. They're significantly higher in that larger area.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
I think that you put short-term rental and you meant to put long-term rental because long-term rental should mirror the regular homeowner and second home should mirror the short-term.
Yes, so they will mirror in terms of how they're treated, but we made some assumptions about multifamily and kind of what we've, yeah, so that's a really good point though. So Sarah mentioned that long-term rentals should mirror what primary homeowners pay in terms of property taxes. And that is true for how the state will value properties going forward, but then the assessed value of those are going to be what we believe to be very different. So it's an important point. Okay. So this is the slide that shows across the different scenarios, what your average owner occupied tax bill would be. So on the left, if you are own, again, I think we just use 1.6 million just to be equal across all of these, but we again know it would be much higher if you're outside of the incorporated area. If you own live in a home you own, which is valued at $1.6 million, your basic incorporation scenario, or the basic incorporation scenario would add $958 to your existing tax bill, which the county portion is $757 in Madison County. So that's that gold piece that Dylan was talking about. If you live in the same home just across the border in the Gallatin County portion, again, you're paying what we think is $1,984 to Gallatin County for county government. And then on top of that, you would also be paying $958 for the city services. The middle two show the same thing I just explained, but for the expanded city government. So that's why that light colored bar is much larger than the ones on the left. And then on the right, you can see what the same home, the home of the same value, what their total tax bill for just city and county would be if you owned a home of $1.6 million in the incorporated area in the new county scenario. So the bottom portion, your county tax bill, instead of being either $757 or $1,984, would be $653 based on the mill levies we calculated to cover the cost of the county services. And you would also be paying $860 to the city government to cover the cost of the city services that Leanne talked about a couple of slides ago. If you owned a home of the same value outside of the incorporated area, you don't pay the city millage. You would only pay the county portion of the tax bill. And the reason that we didn't cost out the whole tax bill is, first of all, it's really complicated. But secondly, there's a lot of things that we don't know, in particular around the school equalization, which is county-based in a county that would look like what is imagined here. We have no idea what that would look like. It would be a project in and of itself to kind of understand how that would look in statute. And because it's not going to the county anyway, we decided to really focus on governance of the services that you all care about being provided here. So this is really complicated. I'll take a question here if anybody has any.
It's my understanding with the creating county that there'd be a certain number of acreage needs to be incorporated in it and a certain population density within it. Is that not the case?
That is the case, yeah, and that was in the section where I was talking about the evaluation of scenarios and those implementation barriers down there. For one, you have to have 250 square miles of developable land. And the boundary that we're proposing is at 97. So it would require a legislative change to create a county at that boundary. The population density thing is an incorporation boundary issue. There's some valuation stuff that I was talking about that probably made sense in 1973 or whatever. They did that in the 70s, but not so much now. But yeah, there are in the report, in each scenario evaluation, there's a legal constraints and statutory authority in there that has actually clickable links to Montana codes. You can read that. There's no legal opinions in there, but it says this is what state law says.
You said.
I don't want to fall. I'm wearing high heels.
What's your red?
Yes, true. Here.
You mentioned to get the acreage limit or the mileage, you have to get state statute revoked or changed. Can you do the same on the population density? Have you looked at that? If you can get it done on the county area requirements, can you draw the density requirements?
Yeah, I guess in a short answer, those are requirements from state statute. And the legislature can change state statute. The E incorporation and the two incorporation scenarios that we have seem to meet the population requirements. The density requirements. Yeah, so the reason that we didn't go down to the Gallatin Canyon and expand that is because there was reasoning behind that density requirement, and it's that you can provide efficient services as a municipality to your citizens. If you're sprawled, it is not efficient to provide those municipal services across there. So we felt that, especially with the community engagement themes of that implementation barrier and that efficiency and fiscal responsibility, that we would center the area that met that, because that requirement kind of does make some sense. I'm not saying that 200 is the golden number by any means, but the goal was to create a boundary that would likely mirror an efficient municipal government.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Jenny, can you go back to the one slide that I forgot to do the chart for? Because I want to make a better point. I want to explain what Sarah had brought up, and I think I can do it better when you guys were looking at this. So I had mentioned that we made some assumptions about how much homes are valued with inside and outside of the incorporation boundary. But when you're talking about property tax bills, and this is what Sarah was trying to get at, it's not just how much the market value is, it's also how the state values it for the determination of your property tax bill. So from starting next year, if you live in the home you own, or if you own what's classified as a long-term rental, your property tax rate will be lower than if you owned a short-term rental or a second home. So it's really the two things kind of working together. And I just wanted to make that point. Maybe you can go to the next one. So I'll just conclude with some takeaways here, and we'll invite Leanne to do the same if there's anything missing here. Our observations in doing this fiscal analysis, which again started with really trying to understand how things are paid for in this community currently, is that resort tax functions already the way it does in some of the resort communities that are incorporated. It offsets property tax revenues, and it pays for things like libraries and parks and housing, maybe at a higher level than some of the incorporated areas that we looked at. Because that's how cities that have resort taxes have invested in. It's what I would call like livability amenities, or amenities that are not like the bare bones, but they're to make the community better and richer as a community. The county scenario would allow property tax revenues to stay in this BizRat area in a kind of more localized fashion, but resort tax already does allow for that reinvestment in a significant way. And as Dylan mentioned, changes to the property tax code that are already taking effect, but will really start to take effect next year, are going to cause shifts in how services are paid for among the permanent population, second homeowners, and I think that's important to keep track of, even as these conversations discuss, because there's move forward, because there's a lot that we don't know about what property taxes will look like the next year. And that was in fact the intent of the legislation, was to kind of make this tax burden more equitably distributed, not just among residential property owners, but also across commercial and residential property owners. So all of those changes coming into effect next year, this analysis might look a little bit different, or fine print.
This slide, or should we have, we blew away that 30-minute thing. Sorry, but you can see how much has been going on. You wanna wrap it up, or you wanna jump in?
I'm fine. This is you, Dylan. Do you want me to take questions now?
Can you hold it? We got this slide and then all the questions. You're okay with all? Don't forget. Yeah, so to wrap it up again, Sarah said it right off the start. This is a presentation of facts. It's not a what you should do. It's a what you could do. It's just three scenarios of what you could do. But I would like to point your attention to this quote at the right. Government at its core is an experiment. It's an ever-changing system shaped by people, values, and circumstances. It evolves through trial, adaptation, and constant balance between representation, efficiency, and accountability. And the study recognizes that. So we evaluated 3 very specific scenarios, and they came with 3 very specific costs. In the real world, government has changed already since we started this project several times and would continue to change. Not just the government that we evaluated in the scenarios, but the government that you do have. You do have local government. You are governed by 2 counties and all these districts, and it's a social experiment. And just to see the amount of people in this room participating in government is, you guys are a bunch of dorks. But it's really valuable because participation is important, because it's the people that shape government. We took very specific scenarios and looked at what you're doing now and evaluated them. But government changes, and you should know that we'll always change and we'll always keep changing. And participating in government in some form or fashion, even if it's something like this, is how you make those changes. And I've watched this community change it for the better already. So that's important to note. And now I hope that you have an in-depth understanding of some 3 scenarios and how you're doing things now, and a better understanding. I gained, when we talked about what did you learn, I gained a real better understanding of this community's abilities to do things. When we started down this path, and we go, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's possible. And about halfway through the community engagement, I took all that off the table and thought that everything's possible. So that's what I learned through this study. And then I hope that this report is used far outside of just evaluating these 3 scenarios, and that you use it as a community voice to say, this is what matters to us. This is maybe some ways that we can accomplish that. But in evaluating those ways, maybe you'll find a different way as well to get something else done. And even if you do choose one of these paths, or there is a petition and you do incorporate, that you use the community voice in this report to frame the community the way you want, because there's some real consistent themes there. There's a lot of differing opinions in this community, but when it comes down to it, you all want the same things. You just think that there's differing opinions on how to get there. But knowing that you all want the same things is an important step. So that's in conclusion. I believe the next slide says questions, and we already have teed up. And this is the link to the report. There's a QR code there. The report's on the website. If you stay, because really up to you on what you want to spend your money on, but it's providing the same services, and resort tax helping provide the funding for that. Moving forward would stay the same.
And we did at one of the last meetings, I won't be offended that you don't remember this. We talked about the fact that resort tax does grow faster than property tax revenues, which I think is important to remember, because if you have in a typical incorporation scenario, and this actually happened when we did include the parks department that Leanne mentioned, and kind of like assumed we folded in the district. Eventually, the way our fiscal model works is you have your costs escalating by different factors. So for example, like assumed cost of living increases for city employers or whatever. Property tax revenues are really limited in how much they grow, even here. And if you are in an assumption where growth won't be as strong as it has been in terms of property values in the last couple of years, and you're getting to a point where there might not be as much new development in this area, every local government, and this is most of our clients, are the governments in very different positions where they just do not have enough money because their property taxes just cannot keep up with the costs. So I think it's a kind of a aspect of your question I just wanted to remind everybody of. And you would have very little control over it in either of the counties if there needed to be a tax increase.
And we're going to go to Representative Griffiths, and thank you all for all your hard work.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to say this all with under current law, because as Mr. Romney pointed out, the laws can change and we can get help with that. Under current law, liquor laws, just so you know, it's not just the municipality, it's also a 5-mile around the municipality. So the quotas will be the municipality and 5 miles around it will be affected. The Attorney General opinion is good until a Montana Supreme Court opinion comes out or the Montana legislature changes the laws. And just so you know, the issue with the resort being a resort area and going into an incorporated municipality is suddenly it becomes a resort community, which has different laws, which means that the resort community, the municipality, can actually sue resort tax to take their portion of resort tax and make it their own. That's the legal issue. And that wasn't talked about in the Montana, under the Attorney General's opinion. Most roads, here's a good thing, most roads in the district are dedicated to the public, but maintained by the HOAs, which the city could continue doing. Not that anyone wants that, but no, that's out there. And last, West Yellowstone, I just had a meeting with them 2 weeks ago, and I'd say they would be game for a county.
Thank you for all of that. You could have been on the team. And do you have a question at all? Okay, great.
I do want to thank you for that too, because obviously I'm not an attorney, so it always concerns me when somebody writes down notes your whole presentation. But you confirmed everything. And I was thinking that it's in the report, we're on the same page, so that's a great thing. And all of those things, if you want to read those sections of statute, they're really fun to read in the word. They're all linked in the report. You just click on them and it pulls up current state statute. It will always pull up 2023, I think, is what's out there now. So if that changes, I apologize for that. But thank you for the opinion.
My question is regarding governance. So it's pretty clear in the model that you've spoken about in the incorporated and new county model that the governance structure for the municipality or the incorporated is a mayor and council. But you haven't spoken about those who would be in the new county. Do you expect to have commissioners then for representation for those in the county?
Yes, that's a great question. So the county would follow the commission county section where you have 3 commissioners, just very similar to both Madison and Gallatin counties. It's the one, so it's kind of weird, like if you incorporate or create a new county, you get the one you get, and then there's these alternate versions in state law that you can pick and go to if you want to, but you start with like the basic one and you elect these officers, and then they kind of set up the rest of your world for you.
One right here.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So in the first 2 scenarios that we incorporate and do not go the county route, the special districts that cross county lines will remain like the fire district and park district, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to play this back. So if we're incorporated, we have a whole extra layer of cost. Okay, and it's permanent. Not gonna get rid of the mayor, because we don't want to pay for it, okay? If we're in the unincorporated, what is our additional cost there?
So depending on the scenario that you're talking about, if you're in the first 2 incorporated scenarios and you're outside of the incorporation boundary, then your stuff stays the same.
Okay, and the thing that you touched on just briefly was the capital infrastructure. We have to build buildings for these people. We have to build detention centers. We have to build.
Yes, you
all
could.
of that is additional. And the bottom line is, what are we gaining? I don't know. That's all.
So I'm gonna just remind everybody that we're here to talk about facts, not opinions. So while you had a ton of facts in there, we would have to buy buildings, we'd have to build buildings, and that is expensive. So I just want to make sure we're being clear.
Are you gonna answer that, Dylan?
Sorry, what was the question? What are they getting? I mean, I guess that's up to you. The first 2 sections were based on representation. You're getting a mayor. Was that worth to you? I'm not telling you if that's appropriate or worth it or not, but you know, in the first scenario, you're getting the planning, zoning, building codes, mayor and 2 council members, and it's gonna cost $950.
year.
I just have a question. One of the needs that isn't being met is planning and zoning, and I'm curious what the feeling of deficiency, is for Big Sky versus having Gallatin County planning and zoning. I guess I see some of the fights that are going on in Bozeman right now with planning and zoning and changing some of the zoning and how that could impact people living in an incorporated.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm actually a planner, so well qualified to maybe tackle this one. Right now, the planning and zoning district in Gallatin County, and there's none on the Madison County side, is what's called a Part 1 legacy zoning district. And it's a citizen initiated zoning district that has its own plan and its own code. It's got an advisory committee, the Big Sky Zoning Advisory Committee, that makes a recommendation to the zoning commission in Gallatin County. And what we've heard in the past is that things get lost in translation from that citizen driven plan that doesn't necessarily reflect the Gallatin County growth policy because it's a citizen driven plan. And that sometimes the zoning advisory commission isn't, their recommendations aren't necessarily always upheld at the zoning commission because the zoning commission can have differing priorities. So that was the reason that we just chose to put the planning and zoning inside the municipality, because then it's a direct local representation. It's not providing a broader sized commission to make your decisions.
I have a few questions. I'm really surprised about the density of the mountain. How many people live there? Do you know that number? Is that employees or?
I can't pull it off the top of my head. The numbers came from the census data.
Doesn't ever feel like they have very many voters to make any difference. So that's interesting in terms of representation. And you're not making a recommendation about going to the first point that I think most, in my opinion, drove this, which is community representation. You started, and you don't know, but I'm guessing it's between 25 and 30 people that we elect. So we do have representation. And then is your suggestion that we add 5 more people to that? So we'd have because we aren't getting rid of any of those people.
My suggestion is to read the final report and decide for yourself whether you'd like to elect 5.
And then I'm just trying to, I guess I'll just look up those figures in the final report, but those are people. It's based on census.
Based on the census data. So it was when the census did their data, it was where are you living at April 1, 2020, I think, right before.
So it includes seasonal workers.
It could.
That would make a lot. I'm just sitting next to somebody that lives in the canyon. We both lived here a long time and we're like, wow, the canyon seems closer and more populated than the mountain. When I lived on the mountain, I couldn't find a neighbor in the rest of the year, so, okay, thank
It is
you.
interesting. I mean, we do a lot of census analysis in different communities and the fact that I actually think they do the surveys year round. So depending on when they're done, that impacts it. I know, for example, just working in college towns, they always look like way poorer than they are because they have these large population of students living there who are seasonal, frankly. So yeah, I think it would include workers depending on finance.
And one clarifying with that too is that, sorry. And you'll notice that their projections are through 2033 and it's 2025, almost 2026, right? In those that we use that census data, we did it intentionally because it's the data that the capital improvements plan used. And the intent was to mirror the goals and objectives with your capital improvements moving forward with future governance. We didn't want to be publishing something 2 years later from your capital improvements plan that had a different number in it. It was completely changed so that you can have guiding documents for your community that are speaking the same language. So we stopped at 2023 because that's when the capital improvements plan stops.
Well, the 2020 census had obvious problems because it was collected during COVID. So take it with a grain of salt, but it is the best available.
If you really wanted to know, you should FOIA the Secretary of State. I can say this was like the last day of the project, but I think that, they could probably give you the number of registered voters in this area.
You said registered voters.
Yeah, that's true.
Not census.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I mean, the reason people live down here is kind of a tough place to live.
Yeah.
In April, in May, or in those times, right? And there's huge employee housing. Just makes a difference.
Yeah, and up to 3,300 or 2,400, depending on which boundary you're talking about, like only a third of them are adults who could vote anyway, and then we all know how many people actually registered.
Thank you for all of the work. You've given us really a lot to think about as we're thinking about these things. I just want to be clear that we have your framework kind of in mind. So under either of the incorporation scenarios or under the county scenario, we would be entitled to state distributions from the state, either from the general fund or from specific excise taxes on fuel, alcohol, gambling, hotel rents, right? But those numbers not included in your calculations, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, we did not account for those revenue streams in the incorporation scenarios, and the county was actually even more complicated. I kind of glossed over this, but because we didn't have a chart to look at, but county revenue streams that are intergovernmental come with responsibilities that are vast and not included in this because we were trying to make this really simple to understand. And so yeah, they're not included.
It is almost 7:30, and again, we apologize for going over, but it's a lot, and we're glad you're here. Okay, we'll hit the next steps. The next steps, we're going to, hopefully you all logged into the sign-in, and I have your emails, and we'll throw you into the e-newsletter database if you're not already in there, and we'll send you out the link to the final report. And then, Dylan, I'm going to give you the floor for the next steps.
Well, you don't know the next steps, is what you're saying. The next steps are really, as far as the scenarios go, up to the community. There's not an implementation plan, this fact. If any one of the scenarios that the community wishes to pursue, the process to do so is in the report. So you can first, an example for incorporation, starts with a petition, which you have to do to start with the county. But because of the pros and cons and the differing opinions on how to accomplish the same goals that the community wants to accomplish, we're not recommending how you get there. We're giving you some options to get there and take it yourself. And if you do, and you need anything clarifying, give me a call. But as far as the rest of the document, that community sentiment, community values, I have a feeling that we'll be presenting probably more and talking about that as other projects and other things go on in the future. And I hope that it's a great reference for the community. The document will be on the website. The website's going to stay up for quite a while. Go through all the community engagement, reach out on the website. My contact information is available if you have questions. So yeah.
Super fast.
Where do we go from here? What's our next step? We have been very clear from the beginning that we are not going to talk about next steps. We were going to provide the facts in the report, and it's up to citizens to make decisions on their next steps. So as citizens, you have a choice. You have a choice of what you can do. And we were very clear with WGM and Echo Northwest and said there is not to be a next steps from resort tax. So we are hosting the meeting. We have paid for the study with the intent that we can arm our community members with the data and the facts so that they can choose what their next steps are. So I would turn it back to everybody here. You get a choice on what you make your next step, and then we'll all go from there. I think we've all been very committed as a community to acting together and doing things together. And so I look forward to seeing what comes next for all of us in Big Sky, whether it's this or whether it's something else. So.
And I will offer up an opinion. Sarah's looking at me. My opinion is whatever you choose your next steps to be, just the fact that you filled this room and asked the questions that you asked, your next steps will be in the right direction.
I'm thinking of the WGN group and nothing was left. You guys are fabulous. I'm to,